Feral by Night is a storytelling series of eerie tales, strange houses, hauntings, weird things that happen on lonely roads, and all the things that go bump in the night. I'm Papa G, and this is Feral by Night. So turn the lights down and settle in. Some stories are better heard after dark. Caleb was 12 the first time he saw the old woman sitting on the porch of a house that wasn't supposed to be there. He rode the bus home from school every afternoon, and the driver dropped him off at the end of his grandfather's gravel driveway. From the road to the house, it was nearly a quarter mile, with pine trees on both sides and a rusted cattle gate that hadn't been used in years. Most days, Caleb didn't mind the walk. It was quiet, and by the time he reached the house, his grandfather usually had something cooking on the stove or a basket of tomatoes sitting on the kitchen counter. But halfway between the road and the house, there was an old field on the left, and at the far edge of that field, tucked behind tall weeds and a crooked line of trees, sat an abandoned farmhouse. At least, that was what Caleb thought it was. The house was gray and sagging, with one upstairs window broken out and a front porch that leaned badly to one side. The roof looked soft in places, like one hard storm would cave the whole thing in. Caleb had noticed it before, but he had never paid much attention to it. Then one afternoon in October, he saw the old woman. She was sitting on the porch in a wooden rocking chair, wearing a faded blue dress with long white hair pulled back from her face. Her hands rested in her lap. She wasn't rocking or waving. She was simply sitting there, looking across the field toward the driveway, watching Caleb walk home. He slowed down when he saw her. At first, he thought maybe someone had finally bought the place, though he couldn't imagine why anyone would want it. There were no cars in the yard, no work trucks, and no sign that anyone had started repairs. There was only that old woman on the porch, sitting still while Caleb walked past. He kept moving, but the whole time, he could feel her watching him. When he got to his grandfather's house, he went inside, dropped his backpack by the kitchen table, and asked who lived in the old farmhouse across the field. His grandfather was standing at the sink washing tomatoes from the garden, and he didn't turn around right away. After a moment, his grandfather asked which farmhouse he meant. Caleb pointed back down the driveway and said he meant the gray one past the field, the one with the porch. His grandfather dried his hands on a dish towel and looked out the kitchen window. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he told Caleb there wasn't any farmhouse there anymore. Caleb laughed because he thought his grandfather was messing with him, but his grandfather didn't laugh with him. He said the Harrow place had burned down more than 30 years earlier. A woman named Mrs. Harrow had lived there alone after her husband died, and the story was that one winter night, the chimney caught, the house went up fast, and she never made it out. Caleb told him that couldn't be right, because he had seen the house and had seen someone sitting on the porch. His grandfather looked at him then, and his face had gone tight with worry. He told Caleb to stay away from that field. Caleb promised he would. The next afternoon, Caleb forgot about the promise until the bus dropped him off. The air was cold and the sky was low and gray. He started up the driveway, trying to keep his eyes on the gravel in front of him, But before he reached the middle of the drive, he looked toward the field. The farmhouse was there again, and so was the old woman. She wore the same blue dress, and her white hair was pulled back the same way. She sat in the same wooden rocking chair on the same leaning porch, only this time the chair was moving. It rocked slowly back and forth, as if she had all the time in the world. Caleb stopped walking. The old woman lifted one hand from her lap and waved, but it wasn't a friendly wave. It was small and slow, more like she was calling him over than greeting him. Caleb turned away from the field and ran the rest of the way to the house. That evening, he told his grandfather again. His grandfather got very quiet, then put on his coat, took a flashlight from the drawer, and told Caleb to stay inside. Caleb watched from the kitchen window as his grandfather walked down the driveway, crossed the field, and disappeared into the trees. He was gone for almost 20 minutes. When he came back, his boots were black with ash, and that was the part Caleb noticed first. His grandfather's boots weren't muddy. They were coated in ash. His grandfather came through the back door, locked it behind him, and sat down at the kitchen table. He said there was no house there. All he had found was the old foundation, burned beams, a collapsed chimney, and weeds growing through what used to be the floor. Caleb asked why his boots were covered in ash if the fire had happened 30 years ago, but his grandfather didn't answer. After that, Caleb tried to stop looking. Every day when the bus left him at the road, he kept his eyes on the gravel and walked as fast as he could. Some days, he made it all the way home without glancing over. Other days, he couldn't help himself, and every time he looked, the house was there. Sometimes the old woman sat on the porch. Sometimes she stood in the doorway. Once, Caleb saw her at the upstairs window, even though he could still see the rocking chair sitting empty below. That was the day he stopped trying to walk calmly and ran all the way home. The worst day came about 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Caleb got off the bus later than usual because the driver had taken a detour around a wreck on the main road. By the time he reached his grandfather's driveway, the sun was already going down. The trees looked darker than they should have, and the field was full of mist. Caleb started walking fast. He told himself to keep his eyes forward, and he told himself the house wasn't real. He reminded himself that his grandfather had gone out there and found only burned wood, weeds, and ash. Then he heard the slow creak of a rocking chair coming from across the field. He stopped and looked. The farmhouse was closer than it had ever been. It was no longer sitting at the far edge of the field. It had moved halfway across it, and the porch faced him as if the whole house had turned in his direction. The old woman sat in her chair, rocking slowly. This time there was a light on inside the house, a warm yellow light like someone had lit a lamp. Caleb backed away, and the old woman stopped rocking. Behind her, the front door opened. From the house up the driveway, Caleb heard his grandfather shouting his name, and that snapped him out of it. He ran so hard he slipped twice in the gravel. His backpack bounced against his shoulders, and he didn't stop until he reached the porch of his grandfather's house. His grandfather pulled him inside and locked the door. Then he closed every curtain in the house. Caleb had never seen him look afraid before. That night, his grandfather finally told him the rest of the story. Mrs. Harrow hadn't died alone. People said she had taken in children sometimes, including runaways, cousins, and kids whose parents needed help. The night the house burned, no one knew how many were inside. Only one body was ever officially found, and that body was hers. After the fire, people in town started seeing things near the field. They found small handprints in ash. They heard children crying near the tree line. they saw a woman in a blue dress sitting where the porch used to be. The sightings went on for years, then stopped until Caleb started seeing her. Caleb asked why she wanted him, and his grandfather said he didn't know. Then he told Caleb that some houses don't just burn down and go away. Some houses remember. For the next week, his grandfather drove down to the road every afternoon and picked Caleb up from the bus stop. During that time, Caleb didn't see the farmhouse at all. Then, one Friday, his grandfather had an appointment in town and got held up, and the bus dropped Caleb off like normal. The driveway looked longer than ever. Caleb waited by the road for 5 minutes, then 10, but his grandfather didn't come. The sun was dropping, and he could see his grandfather's house in the distance, but he knew he would have to walk past the field to get there. So he started walking. At first, everything was quiet. There was no rocking chair, no porch boards creaking, and no old woman waiting at the edge of the field. Then he smelled smoke. It wasn't wood smoke from a fireplace. It was sharper and older, like burned paper soaked in wet ash. Caleb turned his head before he could stop himself, and the farmhouse was there. It wasn't across the field. It wasn't halfway across the field. It was right beside the driveway, close enough that the porch steps almost touched the gravel. The old woman stood at the bottom step with her blue dress burned black around the hem and her white hair hanging loose around her face. Behind her, through the open door, Caleb could see a hallway lit by firelight. Children stood in that hallway, though they weren't clear or solid. They were only small, dark shapes gathered close together, watching him from inside the house. The old woman reached out her hand, and Caleb couldn't move. Then his grandfather's truck came roaring up the driveway with the horn blaring. The moment the headlights hit the house, it vanished, leaving only an empty field and a line of trees. His grandfather slammed the truck into park, jumped out, and grabbed Caleb so hard it hurt. He didn't scold him or ask what had happened. He just put him in the truck and drove to the house without saying a word. That night, Caleb slept on the couch while his grandfather sat in a chair by the front door, with every light in the house turned on. In the morning, his grandfather said Caleb was going to stay with his aunt for a while. Caleb didn't argue. He packed one bag. Before they left, he looked down the driveway one last time. The field was empty and the trees moved in the wind. There was no house, no porch, and no rocking chair. But just as his grandfather started the truck, Caleb noticed a small gray handprint pressed against the windshield, made entirely of ash. Years later, Caleb would tell himself he had imagined most of it. He would tell himself he had been a kid, and kids get scared, and old family stories can do strange things to your mind. But he never went back to that property. He didn't go back when his grandfather got sick, when the house was sold, or when the new owners tore everything down and built something new. Then, when Caleb was 32, he got a letter from the county. Inside was an old envelope his grandfather had left for him, marked to be delivered after his death. There was only one photograph inside. It was black and white, and it showed a farmhouse standing at the edge of a field. On the porch sat a woman in a blue dress. Beside her stood a little boy holding her hand. Caleb turned the photo over. Written on the back in his grandfather's handwriting were 4 words. "She saw me first." Feral by Night is the sister podcast to The Feral Folklorist. You can find information on both podcasts on feralfolklorist.com. And if you'd like to see the animated video versions of these stories, consider becoming a patron on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. And if you're ever in the market for metaphysical supplies, our store, Aromagees Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromagees.com.